Tonight we come to our third and final objection to the Jewishness of the 144,000. The final objection to arguing that people will argue that these are really not biological descendants of Jacob or of Israel. We're going to get through this and dismiss this one fairly quickly because it's fairly easy, but it will lead us into some other things. So I won't insult your intelligence, but just a very quick review. We're in Revelation 7, and here in a moment we're going to read verses 4b through 8. We haven't read it in a while, and we'll need it because we're going to need all 12 of the tribes here. But quickly in review, the first objection to this really referring to descendants from Abraham, if you'll recall, was the so-called 10 lost tribes theory. That whenever the northern kingdom went into Assyrian exile under Shalmaneser V in 722 BC, then those tribes that went over there were assimilated and basically gone and lost. And we dealt with that. We won't recover that. The second objection is where we were last week, and that was the objection where people say that these tribes and the people supposedly, apparently from them, 144,000 that would be sealed. People say, how can that be? Because no one can trace their ancestry back to the 12 tribes. So it has to do with the tribal descent from these particular tribes back to their forefathers. And that was last week's message. And we didn't spend a lot of time because I was running short at the end, but we did talk very briefly about DNA. And then one of you had a great story afterwards about a case that you knew where they had a DNA of a suspect, evidently of a suspect. Normally DNA is involved with criminal activity. Otherwise, who cares, or why would you need to know? But they were able to get a complete facial rendition of the person. And then when they caught the person, it matched what they had drawn just from DNA. So what I was trying to stress the last go around is the power of DNA. We didn't know much about it 40 years ago, and I wonder where we will be 40 years from now. If you had nothing but a DNA sample, and you were able to draw a picture with the person's correct hair color and whether it's straight or curly, their eye color, the shape and positioning of their nose, the size of their lips, where their cheekbones are, and that's what they did. That's what they did with DNA. So I would be very hesitant to say that people can't trace their ancestry back to one of these 12 tribes. I mean, I can't do it. I don't have the expertise to do that, but I'd be very hesitant to say that can't be done. That would seem like a huge leap into the unknown, and better watch out because science may prove you wrong. Science may prove, oh yeah, they can trace themselves back that far. And the other thing to keep in mind, and then we'll go into where we're going tonight, we looked at tribal lists. At the list of the tribes were the records of the genealogies were very important. We looked at some verses back, I think in Ezra, that whenever they came back from captivity, and this is all the way from not Assyrian, but Babylonian captivity. Now 150 years after Assyrian captivity, they went into exile in Babylon. And another 70 years after that, they've come back. They had records of all the genealogies. And that's amazing that they had them. No one knows where those records were kept. People would guess and assume, and maybe rightfully so, in the temple. But I talked to you last time about before the temple was there, before the temple was ever built, they had all these genealogies. They had records of them. So where did they keep them then? Maybe when the temple was built, they were moved into the temple, but then the temple was destroyed. So were they in the temple? These genealogies that Ezra has in his possession, were they in the temple and they got them out before, or were they somewhere else?
Maybe they could have hidden them.
They could have hidden them. That's where I'm going here with this in just a minute. Somehow they're either with Ezra or the people over in Assyria and then Babylon? Or did they hide them somewhere? And what I was going to mention about that was in the last 100 years, the greatest biblical manuscript discovery in the last 2,000 years was the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. Those were found by Bedouins in caves in Qumran in Israel, in modern day Israel. They were found in 1947. There are all kinds of fragments that antedate the Christian era. Prior to that, the earliest text that we had was like 9th century AD, 900 years after Christ. That was our Hebrew text that our Hebrew Bible was based on, that Hebrew Bibles prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls were based on, the Masoretic text. That's 900 AD. That's not that long ago. When you think David lived 2,000 years, he was 1000 BC, now we're 1000 AD. There's 2,000 year gap. How do we know if those Masoretic manuscripts are accurate? When they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, which go back to the 2nd century BC. We've just moved ourselves back in history by 1,000 years. And what they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls was almost identical to what was in the Masoretic text, which showed us that the scribes who had been transcribing for hundreds of years had done a meticulous job under the providence of God to keep the text more or less preserved. So if those were put in caves in clay pots in 200 BC, and it was 2,000 years later before anybody discovered them. What is still in Israel today? Israel is a desert. It is a desert. Southern Judea, the Negev, as the Bible even calls it, N-E-G-E-V, the Negev is a desert. And there are mountains and caves everywhere that are inaccessible. And it was by sheer luck that these Bedouins found that. They were herding their sheep, and their sheep had gotten to a location down on the side of a cliff that they were trying to get to them. And when they got down there to them, they saw some caves on the side of a cliff, and they went in there, and lo and behold, they found pieces of the book of Daniel. They found a copper scroll. They found all kinds of things in there. So don't be so hasty, anybody out there today, to say, well, there are no records, the records are all gone, or to say there's no way you can trace yourself back. That's just not in my opinion, that's not a very wise position to take, because I think people can probably trace themselves back, and if they can't now, maybe in 20 years they can, and there still may be things to be discovered out there. And the point on all of that last time anyway was there's nothing in Revelation 7 that tells us that the 144,000 have to know what tribe they came from. Maybe they do know, maybe they don't. God knows. But there's nothing here. So we're safe regardless, whether they can trace themselves back or not. All we're told is that John didn't see them being sealed. He saw the angel, remember, but he heard them being sealed. And I've even suggested to you before that I don't know that he heard that number 144,000 in the end of verse 4. I think that's probably his multiplication. What he heard was when the angel said, we have sealed 12,000 of the tribe of Judah. And then he said, and then he heard 12,000, and then another 12,000, and then another 12,000. So it never says these people said, hey, I want to volunteer as one of the 12,000 of the tribe of Judah because I'm descended from Judah. It never says that. So we don't have to assume that they even know what tribe they're from. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. All right, so that's all in the past, and kind of tidying up some loose ends that I didn't get to talk about with regard to DNA at the end of the last message. So tonight we come to our final objection, and before I read it, or before I tell you what it is, let's read the passage again, because we do need to see this passage now. We've been away from it, going down rabbit holes, chasing people's objections and trying to respond to them. Revelation 7:4. And I heard the number of them that were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. And he means of all these tribes that I'm going to list. And so I think he heard of the tribe of Judah. He heard an angel say there's 12,000 that have been sealed. And of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. This Naphthalim, it's just trying to go from Hebrew to Greek to English. So just kind of ignore that and go back to your Old Testament pronunciation and spelling for the tribes. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. And we should be thinking as we're reading this, why so much repetition? We only have 22 chapters to get the revelation revealed to us. Why so much repetition here? Must be very important in the mind of God to have given it to John this way, and for John to have written it down in laborious detail. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. Of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. And I said before that verse 5 and the end of verse 8 are the only places where it said were sealed. Everything else is what we call an ellipsis. You can fill it in. It should be italicized. It wasn't totally italicized. Only part of it was. You can fill it in. You can put it in italics, whatever. Just so that you know, of each tribe, 12,000 were sealed. But he just bookends this for us from the beginning of verse 5 to the end of verse 8. By starting and saying of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000, then he goes through all the tribes until he gets to Benjamin. And he says, of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. And then, you know what? Lo and behold, that's the end of that vision. I remember saying when I started this study a few weeks ago, it raises more questions than it supplies answers for. We think we know a lot, like, wow, look at all that we know here. But there is so much that we don't know that we have to hypothesize about, A. B, we have to track down from some other place in the Bible, or C, we just are left in the dark. And most of it is, I'm afraid, we'll just be left in the dark. Some of it is in other passages of Scripture, and some of it you can choose your mind and say, well, I think I can figure out how this is shaking out, even though it doesn't say it here or anywhere else in the Bible. You say, well, this is just what makes sense. But what is so interesting to me is after this laborious count of 12,000, 12,000, 12, that's the end. And now in verse 9, after this, I beheld and lo, I had another vision. And we are saying, John, we don't want the next vision yet. Stop, go back. We want some more from the first vision. But that's it on the first vision, and then he goes to the second one. Just very interesting. So you process that, and you think, if you're like me, I think like, why? I had 6 faithful friends. Remember, they taught me all I knew. Their names are how and what and why, when and where and who. You stop and you say, well, why and when and where and who and wherefore and why not? And sometimes you can come up with answers and sometimes you can't, but it's still worth the effort. Okay, so for our third objection, this is going to be an easy one to deal with. So we're on objection number 3. Objection number 3 goes like this. And I'll just explain it, and I'll explain it a couple of times if I have to, but I think it'll be really easy for you to understand. The objection goes like this. Because this list that we just read, that's why I wanted to read it, because this list that we just read does not reflect the Old Testament list of the 12 tribes, then that's a clue to the reader, us, that something is amiss with these tribes, something is amiss, and therefore it should not be taken literally. We should look for some kind of spiritual or symbolic meaning. Does that make sense? So, if I gave you a list, maybe a list of my children, and I gave it to you 10 times, I gave it to you 9 times, and 9 times out of 10, I gave it in the same order, but that 10th time, I gave it differently. Then maybe there was a meaning there. Maybe not, but maybe there was a meaning. And so you would go, well, why 9 times the same way and the 10th time different? So that's the logic. That's the logic that the people are trying to use here. And as long as, well, I'll save that for a moment. So because this list doesn't reflect the Old Testament list, something's up. Something's up, and it's up to us to figure it out. Don't take it literally, because this doesn't fit anything in the Old Testament. There's got to be some spiritual or some symbolic meaning. So even if you don't know anything about the 12 tribes, you can probably just use your mind and come up with a good way to check or verify this objection. And what would that be? Let's go find an Old Testament list. Let's just go find an Old Testament list. So this doesn't take any deep theological or philosophical or even logical ability. All this is just legwork. Okay, so here is the order: Judah, Reuben, Gad, and so forth. Here's the order. They say this does not fit the normal list you find in the Old Testament. And I just read this everywhere. I hope people can feel my frustration with people who read the Bible and just refuse to submit to what it says. So I copy this down from a formal paper submitted for a doctoral dissertation, and I'm not naming any names, I would not hurt anybody's feelings, but submitted for a doctoral dissertation on this chapter right here. And here's a quote: "This list does not match up with the traditional list." End of quote. And I read that everywhere. And it's so frustrating. So I like to say that first, the 10 tribes theory, this is the way I look at things, that 10 tribes theory, they're trying to come in the front door and deceive us. With the DNA and the tribal descent, they're trying to come in the back door. And with this one, they're trying to come in the window. It's 100% wrong. It's 100% deceptive. It's 100% not true. There are anywhere from 18 to 20 different occasions where the 12 tribes are actually listed. And I did not try to find all of them, but there are at least 18 to 20. In the 18 to 20 that I know of, they are all different. There are no 2 that are the same. There are no 4 that are the same. There are no 8 that are the same. There are no 10 that are the same. They're all different.
When you say different, either the names are different between a pair of lists, or if the names are the same, the order is different. You mean different in that way, either different in order or name.
I call it in the arrangement or the inclusions and exclusions. They're different in one or more of those regards. So when someone tells us, now look, this list doesn't match the Old Testament list. Well, look, let's say that there were 10 Old Testament lists of the tribes on 10 different occasions. How many out of the 10 would have to be identical for you to call that the regular or normal list? I don't even know the answer to that, but what? I mean, this is just up for grabs. At least 7 would have to be. At least 7 for you to say, and 7 all in the same order, including the same people. 7 out of 10. Could you say that's the normal list? Maybe, maybe not. It's totally up to opinion. Would it have to be 8? Would it have to be 9? Would it have to be all 10 before you can say this is the standard, regular, normal list? So
in that one where it said the traditional, what is the traditional list?
well, there are 20 different ones. So which one out of the 20?
There is no traditional.
I would say the traditional has to be some kind of standard, some kind of this is what is recognized as the acceptable list before it could be standard, regular, normal, traditional, any of those words. But if you have all of the lists, when I say list, I mean just when they, let's just go look at an example. That not that yet. We're going to go to that because that will be very helpful. Wasn't it in? I'm going to have to go find this real quickly in Ezra, one of the early chapters of Ezra. And I may be on a wild goose chase because I'm not finding it. Maybe was it in Chronicles? We were in both of those places earlier. Let me go. Early chapters of Chronicles. Yes, 1 Chronicles chapter 2. Here's just one of these 20 different times you'll find the 12 tribes listed. Just one. And we're not going to look at 20. I don't have the time to do that. Here's just one of them because we were over in 1 Chronicles just a couple of weeks ago. These are the sons of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. Now that really won't mean anything to you right now. Hopefully before we're done tonight, it'll mean a little more to you. That to me is what I would call a really unusual list, because most of the list, if they're going to end with anything, they're going to end with the sons that were born later. The last was Benjamin, the next to last was Joseph. And yet we have, after those two names, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. So I would call this one a really unusual one by almost any standard. But in one sense, they're all unusual because there is not a standard. And that's the important point we want to note. So with that in mind, if you will pull out your handout that you have that we're going to need for tonight and maybe the next couple of weeks. And all I did, guys, was just try to go through and try to simplify things. Some of us know the tribes better. Some of us don't know them as well, but none of us know them perfectly from memory and everything about them. So this is going to become very helpful. So let's just start. We'll start at the beginning, at the very top. The 12 sons of Jacob, who was renamed after he wrestled with the angel Israel. He had 12 sons, and this is all documented in Genesis 29 through 35. So here's how the story went, and you'll know some of this from Sunday school, but maybe it's helpful still to just go over this and review some of this. Jacob's parents did not want him. We have Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob, the third patriarch, to marry the local women because they were heathen women. They wanted him to marry within the family. And so Jacob took a journey back to his uncle's farming spread, Laban, his mother's brother. And there he saw this beautiful girl named Rachel and wanted to marry her and asked Laban for Rachel's hand in marriage. And Laban said, yes, you can marry her, but you have to earn her hand in marriage. You have to work for me for 7 years. You know all this from Sunday school. So Jacob agreed because he loved this woman so much. I will work for her hand in marriage for 7 years. He worked for 7 years. On wedding night, he lifts the veil. It's not Rachel, it's her older sister, Leah. He has been tricked, which is not that surprising because Jacob, with his mother, is the very one who had tricked his father into giving him the blessing. So whatever you sow, you reap. Now he has been tricked by his uncle. It's very interesting how God works all of these details out.
Wow. I
And-
never thought of that before, but that's actually so true.
Yes, he had tricked
I remember,
and
yeah,
stole the
he
birthright.
went along with Sarah.
Yes, he stole the birthright with Rebekah, his mother, to get what he wanted from his father Isaac, and he stole it from Esau. So the same thing now happens to him. So Laban said, that's not the way we do things here. We do not give the younger sister in marriage first. The older sister goes first. So that's why you've got Leah. Now, if you want Rachel, I need another 7 years, which he did. So he's worked 7 years and he got Leah, 7 years. He got Rachel. He worked 6 more years and gets a lot of herds and flocks. He's worked 20 years. And Laban changed his wages 10 times. That's one of those verses we use. He changed his wages 10 times, kept cutting his pay, but God still kept blessing him. And he ended up taking a lot of stuff with him when he left. So when he left, he has 2 wives now. The one he loves, Rachel, the younger sister, and the older sister that he does not love, Leah. And they each have a handmaid. Rachel's handmaid is Bilhah, and Leah's handmaid is Zilpah. And a handmaid was just like, a servant, an attendant, one that would do things for them. This is a wealthy family with a big spread and a lot of possessions. And so now he leaves, and now he has 2 wives, and each of them has a handmaid, and so he has 2 handmaids, 2 wives and 2 handmaids. And they begin to give birth to children. Leah, if you'll start in your far top left corner, gets pregnant quickly. She has Reuben, then Simeon, then Levi, and then Judah. And look, these 12 tribes they're like building blocks. If you're going to build a structure, you have to have the blocks. These are some of the building blocks to the rest of the whole Old Testament narrative. You find these tribes and their descendants, you find them in Revelation chapter 7. You find them on the gates of the eternal city, which is not named New York or Los Angeles, which is named Jerusalem, the eternal city. These people who say, I think the church is spiritual Israel and God's done with Israel, there's no way you can end up with that, when way over where we all agree in the last 2 chapters of the Bible is the eternal state. There's still something to do with Israel, because the city is named Jerusalem and the gates have the names of the 12 sons of Israel on them. So these are building blocks. And it's very important to at least be somewhat familiar. And the more you know, the better able you'll be able to interpret other things when you get later in the Old Testament. And so I've got it on a list so you don't have to memorize it. You just pull your list out and say, let me see who belonged to whom. And also jumping ahead. I don't know how far I'll get with this message tonight. I always have so much in my mind that I want to say that ties into what we're talking about. It's also important to recognize and maybe try to remember which sons came from the true wives and which sons came from the handmaids. Because that becomes very important in all of Jewish history. In all of Jewish history, that will become important. Precedence is given to the sons that came from the true wives and not the concubine or the maid that was handed over. So Leah has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. So there are 4 sons of Jacob at this time. And Rachel has not been able to get pregnant and bear a son, and she's pretty anxious over the whole deal. Like, I don't want my husband to love my older sister more than me because she's borne him these sons. So she comes up with this idea, I'm going to give him my handmaid Bilhah, which she does. The next 2 sons, number 5 and 7, are Dan and Naphtali. Leah has not been able to get pregnant after the birth of Judah, and now she sees, my sister is catching up. This is exactly what the narrative says. This is exactly what's going through these women's minds. She's catching up with me. It's 2-4 now. I'm still got her by 2, but she's catching up with me, and I'm not able to get pregnant, so I will give my handmaid Zilpah. And Zilpah has Gad and Asher. So now it's 6-2. Leah is ahead of Rachel. And now Leah is able to conceive again. She bears 2 more sons, Issachar and Zebulun. And then finally, much, much later, Rachel is finally able to conceive, and she has this child Joseph, which is precious and dear to his father. And much of the rest of Genesis is about this one particular son. And then even later, she has her final son, Benjamin, and then dies in childbirth of Benjamin. So that's the story of how we have these 12 men. It's a fascinating story. It's not what we would do today. It's just the way it was done back then. But it's a fascinating story how all this transpired in the second half of the book of Genesis.
Jacob had a daughter, and who bore the daughter to him?
That was Dinah. I think it was Rachel, but don't quote me on that. Google it, and you can find out who was the mother of Dinah. And that's just the only daughter that we know. Could have had another daughter. I doubt he had any more sons because these are the 12 sons. But it only mentions one daughter by name, and that was Dinah.
It was Leah.
It was Leah.
It says Genesis 30:21.
Okay, so correction, not Rachel, it was Leah. Okay, so now we're looking down at the bottom of this list, and we've got 4 different headings and lists. And I'm giving them to you in chronological order. So we've got the birth of the sons in chronological order. So, by the way, you would think, well, that's just the way the 12 tribes will be listed, in the way in which they were born. That would be, that would make sense. That would be probably the normal thing to do. Is just list them in the order in which they were born. But that is actually not the way things will end up happening. The next time we see any kind of list, and them being born is not a list. That is just, chronologically, Reuben was born before Simeon and so forth. The first time we actually see the list is in Genesis 49. And this is Jacob's prophecy, moved by the Holy Spirit to give this prophecy, some of which, according to verse 1, at least some of which, won't happen until the last days. Doesn't mean that all of it is eschatological and has not found fulfillment earlier, but at least some of it is in an eschatological setting, because he said, I'm going to tell you what's going to befall you in the last days. And then he goes on and he gives us what's going to happen to Reuben, verse 5, Simeon and Levi, verse 8, Judah. So far, we're in the order of birth. Compare that to Leah's 4 children, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. So far, we're in order of birth. But look at number 5, Zebulun. Now that's way over, that's number 10. So I'm just trying to document for you that none of the lists, there are no standard lists. You will see a different order, and eventually you're going to see some other changes as well. The next time we see the list is just 2 chapters later in Exodus. This is their entrance into Egypt. In verse 1 of Exodus 1, these are the names of the children of Israel who came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob. And here's the list: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. So far, so good. Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, that's the last born, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. And of course, he doesn't mention Joseph because Joseph was already there. These are the 11 that came down. And then he says in the next verse, Joseph was already in Egypt. So we didn't need to list him. He was already there. But Joseph would be the last name mentioned, or it could be the first name. That's another way you could put it, is you could say he really was first. But in the way that they listed it here, he is the last of the 12. So there's another list. It's different. It's different than the one before, which is different than the one before. The next time chronologically that we really see a list is over in Numbers chapter 1. verses 5 to 15. And this is their preparation for travel. And I'll just explain, you don't even really need to read that. They came out of Egypt in the book of Exodus. They spend a couple of years receiving the Ten Commandments. God gives the Levitical law in the book of Leviticus. All of this is happening, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and then Numbers. When we come to the book of Numbers, now they're ready to break camp and begin to travel to the promised land. And they think they're going straight there and possess it. And they would have, had they trusted God. But when the 2 spies went in and said, we can take it, and the 10 spies said, we can't take it, the people rebelled, revolted, and God said, because of your unbelief, your carcasses will die in the wilderness, and none of you will enter, but your children will. But this in Numbers 1 is prior to that. This is preparation for travel. And so this is the list given. Reuben, Simeon, Judah. Just notice, I don't have to keep belaboring the point. The names are all different than what they have been in the previous list. And then one chapter later in Numbers 2, whenever they move their camp and they're ready to set up camp with the tabernacle in the center, then there'll be 4 tribes on the east, 4 on the south, 4 on the west, 4 on the north. This is in all of the historical details there. And you think, well, what's the purpose of all of that? Well, it just takes time to collect all this information and you start to see what is going on. But so you have 4 tribes in all 4 directions around the tabernacle, and that is how they encamp. But what I want you to see in the 3rd and 4th column that I gave you is now not only do we have a change of order, which we will always have that, we will continue to have that. Now we have some exclusions and inclusions. And that's where things begin to get even more tricky. As you read the list, you say, well, you have to read it very carefully. And then you see, oh, I don't see Levi. And I don't see Joseph. In preparation for travel and how they encamped and many other lists that will come after that, there is the loss of the name of Levi. There is the loss of the name of Joseph. And in their place are 2 new names that we haven't seen before. And those names are Ephraim and Manasseh. So what happened? This is where we'll spend the next 20 minutes of tonight. What happened? And I probably will only get through Levi. What happened? Levi is no longer in the list of the 12 tribes. Keep in mind, it is very interesting, he is in the list of the 144,000 that are sealed. And that probably says something in itself right there. He is in that list, but he is not in our 3rd and our 4th column. What happened? Well, here's what happened. No tribal allotment was going to be given to the tribe of Levi. No territorial boundaries. In other words, no land. He was not going to be given land that belonged to himself in what we call the promised land. Reasons for that are many and varied, and they grow, and you can begin to see a connection as you tiptoe through what actually is happening with the tribe of Levi. So I've got 5 different things, and again, I'm going to give this to you in chronological order as they were revealed in the law of Moses, why Levi has been excluded. It's not a punishment by any means. It's not a punishment, but it could be taken wrongly for sure, as you'll see, just thinking as a logical, reasonable person here in just a moment. So what's going on with Levi? He's not given a tribal allotment. So when they go into the land and you've got you have this map, as you know, you don't see Levi anywhere on there. Levi is gone. You don't see Levi. He was not given any land. So that's what we're addressing right now. Why is Levi not given some territory? Here's what we find as we work our way through the Pentateuch. First of all, God was going to use the tribe of Levi to guard the tabernacle and not to guard the nation. So when you have those tribes encamped round about the tabernacle, they're really guarding the whole nation with 4 tribes on north, south, east, and west. But between them and the tabernacle, you will find the Levites. So here is the little tabernacle, and here you have 4 tribes and 4 tribes and 4 tribes and 4 tribes, and then all around the tabernacle itself, guess who you find? You find the Levites. So God selected them, separated them from the nation, gave them a special responsibility and duty. I don't need you to be warriors. I don't need you to guard against all the enemies. What I need you to do is to guard this. And not guard it from enemies per se, but guard its sanctity, guard its holiness, guard its, keep the profane and the unholy away from that which is holy. And so this you will find, I'll give you some passages and we won't look all these up. Numbers 1, 47 to 51, and Numbers 2, 33 to 34. I don't know that everyone even realizes that this is one of the reasons that God separated. We think of some other reasons which are very important, but this is one of the reasons why God separated Levi from the other tribes, was to guard the holiness of the tabernacle itself. The tabernacle was portable. So you had different families within the tribe of Levi that were responsible for the poles that held up the tent itself. Then you had other people who were responsible for even more holy items. And that would be the Ark of the Covenant and the lampstand and, the things that were inside it. You have all of this division of labor. And God very precisely specified who was responsible for what.
Very precise. I've read it.
So that is one thing involved in Levi being separated. Here's the second thing involved, and that concerns the firstborn. So this is another big subject in the Old Testament, but God taught Israel that I am the sovereign Almighty God, and you owe me everything. You owe me your life, as do all peoples, not just the nation of Israel. But all of us owe God everything. But he said, but I tell you what, you can keep 90%, but you have to give me 10%. So on their animals, when they would raise crops and they would bring an offering, they would bring animal offerings, they would bring grain offerings and cereal offerings. And they had to bring the first fruits to God, and then the 90%, the rest they could keep for themselves. God was trying to teach them that He's the source of everything, and that was the way they would show their recognition of that and their appreciation of that. And it was a law to them, but it was more than a law, because you could do the law begrudgingly and fail in the principle to recognize, I owe everything to God. So just because an Israelite brought his tithe, his 10%, didn't mean he was right in the eyes of God. He had part of it right, but he needed the rest of it. And that is to say, I am happy to give you 10%, Lord. I am so thankful that you have blessed me in so many ways in my life. So it also was going to be for their children as well. In the book of Exodus, I'm thinking it's chapter 4, before Moses ever even got down to Egypt, his commission on the backside of the desert, when God met him in the burning bush, what he told him is go to Pharaoh. And I've skipped over some things about they were in Egypt for 400 years, and now they've grown from just family clans. Exodus 1 were just family clans. Those weren't tribes. It was a man and his wife and however many kids they had. There were 70 souls. I didn't finish reading, but Exodus 1 said 70 souls went down into Egypt.
So these
That's
12 men
and their wives and a child or two, and that was it. There were 70. When they come out, they're 3 million. So they've been down there for 400 years, and they have grown, and God has blessed them, even in slavery. Well, before they weren't in slavery. By the end they were, and they have multiplied, and they've become a great nation. And so now, they're no longer tribal clans. They're no longer the 12 sons of Jacob. Now they're getting ready to be the nation of Israel. Before that, they were just family clans. They were just brothers with kids and wives, 70 people. We have a whole new thing happening in Exodus, and this is the story of the Exodus. Now, God said, I'm going to make you a nation of priests, and you are going to be a holy nation unto me. You are going to be my nation. He had promised Abraham, who was just a man, hundreds of years earlier, that I'm going to bless you, bless your seed, make your seed as numerous as the sand by the sea and the stars in heaven. And that is hyperbole. But I'm going to bless you, and you're going to have many descendants. And this is the beginning of that. And now he's going to turn them into an actual nation. So going back to what I was saying a minute ago, God told Moses, go tell Pharaoh this: Israel is my son. That's what he called him in Exodus 4. Israel is my son. He is my firstborn. Let him go. If you want to find that verse, somebody's looking for it right now. I don't have it written down or memorized, but it's probably halfway through chapter 4, maybe towards the end. I don't know. I hate to do that to you. Let me go find it real quickly, and then you won't have to. Verses 22 and 23. Verses 22 and 23. I hate to leave you hanging, and then you won't hear the next thing I'm going to say while you're busy going to look at that. This is the statement that he was to make. Now, he made a lot of others once he got down there. And what's interesting is the firstborn issue doesn't become an issue until the 10th and final plague. There were a lot of other plagues. God gave Pharaoh plenty of opportunities to change his mind. But what he said is, Israel is my son. All the nations, the Egyptians were God's sons, not in a spiritual sense, but in the sense that he created them and he gave them their territory. Paul says that in Acts 17. All the nations of the earth, the boundaries that they have, God gave them those boundaries. So all the nations of the world are God's sons in that sense. But God said to Moses to say to Pharaoh, but Israel is my firstborn. Let him go. And if you don't let him go, I will take the life of your firstborn. And you know, that's exactly what the 10th plague on Egypt was. Went through all those early plagues, even though this was the initial commission and statement, went through 9 plagues before we finally get to this 10th one, where because Pharaoh did not let the children of Israel go, God killed all the firstborn of man and beast in Egypt. Israelites were spared if they put blood on the side post and over the door and stayed inside. The death angel, Psalm 78, said it was evil angels that God sent through Egypt to kill all the firstborn of all the Egyptian and of all their animals. And so because of all this, what God is going to do in the second place with regard to Levites is say, rather than me requiring, not the death, but me requiring you to turn over all of you firstborn children in Reuben and Simeon and Judah and the rest of them, turn over your firstborn to me. Rather than that, I'm going to take the whole tribe of Levi as a substitute for them. Because imagine the wisdom of that in not splitting up all of these families. You would have every family that has their firstborn son has to be turned over to the Lord. He's no longer a part of the family anymore. That would have just wreaked havoc in the nation. So instead of doing that, in the wisdom of God, he says, in place of all of your firstborn, I will take the whole tribe of Levi. This is in Numbers 3, verses 5 through 13. A third reason we're not seeing Levi in these other tribal lists, a third reason is, according to Deuteronomy 10 and verse 9, what God tells them, he said, I will be your inheritance. Yahweh will be your inheritance in lieu of property in the land of Israel. When I just think of the ramifications of that, we would like to say, well, I would definitely volunteer for that. Well, I hope that we all would, because it would be a great calling to have. But they don't get any land. All their brethren have all of this property that belongs to them that's handed down generation after generation. And what God says is, instead of me giving you land, I'm going to give you me. Well, doesn't all Israel have the Lord? Yes, they do. But the Levites were going to be in a special relationship with God. But they would have to be incredibly spiritually minded in order to recognize the benefit coming to them to be excluded from any property rights in the land of Israel and be given God himself instead. And you know, it probably talks about that in different places in the Old Testament. But as I have slowed down to think about that, and we go, rah, yeah, God is your inheritance. That's right. You don't need any land. That was a difficult thing to accept, because everyone else is going to the promised land and they're all getting land. But I don't get any land that belongs to me and to my descendants and to my family. I don't get any land. I get God instead. So it gives you such an appreciation for who the Levites really were, or who they were really supposed to be. Now, they did not all turn out very well, but the spiritual Levites would have recognized this and would have cherished it. And the fourth thing that's happening with regard to the tribe of Levi is that in lieu of land, on which, if you wonder what's the big deal about land, the land is huge. I'll talk more about that next week. But suffice to say for now, the land gives you the property where you can raise crops and grow animals so you can survive. They don't have metropolitan areas. They don't have supermarkets they go to. You provide for yourself. So in order for you to provide for yourself, what do you have to have? You have to have land where you can have a garden and have a goat and a cow and some sheep. If you don't have that, guess what? You're out of luck. But not so quick. With the Levites, God said, since you don't have land, you will be provided for by the sacrifices and the offerings that the people bring to the tabernacle and later to the temple. This is in Deuteronomy 18, verses 1 through 8. So we're not going to get into there were 5 major sacrifices. They're in the first 6 chapters of Leviticus, and they are a fascinating study. I know of someone where, and I just thought, what a remarkable thing you people did. It was a little, you know how big churches they'll break up and have individual home groups, and you meet in your home and you go to church on Sunday morning and you do your group study in your home group. And they spent 2 years on Leviticus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I bet just a wealth of information they now possess because they spent 2 years studying what those 5 sacrifices are, what they're about, what are the laws, what are the regulations, what's the coming, what's the going, what's the up, what's the down, because they're just fascinating details there. Not all the offerings were mandatory. Not all the offerings were for sin. Not all the offerings were animals. Not all the offerings had to die. You know, there are all different kinds of offerings and sacrifices for all different kinds of reasons. And so some of the offerings, depending on which one it is, some, like a whole burnt offering, as the name implies, the whole thing is consumed to God. But some of the offerings, a choice part, like a shoulder, could be taken off and provide food for the family of the priests and of the Levites. And the same would be true with the grain offerings. So what I'm saying is, rather than them having their own garden, and they might have still had a garden in the city where they lived, but rather than be totally dependent on that, they were mostly dependent. They were mostly dependent on the people bringing their sacrifices and offerings to the tabernacle, and there were many more of them than there were of Levites and priests, and then they would be able to collect the portion that God had designated for them. So again, another reason why Levi is not in the tribal list. And then fifthly and finally, here's a final reason that's also very interesting. Not only is Yahweh their inheritance, but God said, you Levites are the people's inheritance. You are a gift, you Levites, that I am giving back to the nation of Israel. And you can read about that also in Numbers chapter 18 and verse 6. God's gift back to the people. And so they were a gift in several regards. And again, this is not a study on the Levites, but you can probably just think of several ways in which they were a gift, and they're actually spelled out in the Old Testament as well. One way in which they would be a gift is the laws and regulations concerning the sacrifice. What was to be done, how much of it was to be burned, what was to be done with the blood. It's a lot of very technical stuff. So rather than you have to know all of that, you can trust the Levites and the priests because that's their job, that's their profession. So in that sense, they are a gift back to you. It's a little bit like a Christian minister, like me for you. You're a gift to me in many ways, but I can be a gift to you. I can synthesize this stuff, compact it, and you go, well, now I got it down. And you don't have to spend all the time. The same kind of thing was happening with the Levites and the people. They did not have to know all of the laws that the Levites and the priests had to know. And then a second benefit that the Levites were to the people that people don't often think of, and you really see it in later portions of the Old Testament, and that is that they were actually the teachers of the law. So and they were given 46 cities scattered all over, they're called Levitical cities, scattered all over Israel. In all the different tribal allotments, you'd have a Levitical city. And so in that little village would be a group of Levites. When it came their turn to go to the tabernacle or temple to serve, they would leave home and go serve their 30 days or however long they had to serve. And then were allowed to go back home. So when they're back in their city or village scattered all over Israel, they're teaching. They're the teachers. The layperson could come and ask for advice, inquire about some knowledge about the Pentateuch, and it would be up to the Levites to be able to supply them with that. Now, jumping way ahead in your mind, just think what will happen in the nation of Israel if this kind of religious and social economy breaks down. And it does break down. Where the Levites are stealing the best portions of everything, where the Levites are just committing the worst crimes possible. And this is the history of Israel. And the nation began, they were a special people. God was their God in a special way. They were a gift to the people. But they did not keep what God had commanded for them to do. And as a result, all kinds of terrible things began to happen. And as a result, different shrines are being erected, and these priests who should be only going to the centrally designated sanctuary, they're just offering up whatever, whenever, for whomever, and getting paid to do it. Yeah, and so it began a real terrible decline in the nation of Israel. So Levi, and I'm going to conclude with this, was separated. You're not going to find him in a lot of the tribal lists. You'll find him in some. If it doesn't have anything to do with tribal allotments, then yeah, his name could pop up. But he normally won't be that tribe. That name normally won't be found because of these very reasons. Yeah. And all of this, if you just note this in your mind as a final point, all of this is remarkably confirmed in Numbers chapter 17. That's a little small chapter. I don't know, a dozen or so verses, maybe more, a little small chapter. And what happens in number 17 is in the previous chapter, some of the Levites and priests wanted more prestige and power. And so they accused Moses and Aaron, you taking too much on yourself. We have Moses basically predicting their death, saying, if you die a natural death, God hasn't spoken by me, but if the earth opens up and swallows you up, then you'll know I'm God's prophet and my brother Aaron is God's priest. And by the way, I guess you know both Moses and Aaron descended from Levi. You couldn't call them a Levite in the later sense because, the tribe is separated under Moses' jurisdiction. Moses is the great prophet, but they are both Levites in that they descended from Levi. Their mother and their father, according to Exodus 2 and verse 1, was from the tribe of Levi. But anyway, in number 17, after this dispute over are Moses and Aaron just taking too much on themselves? We want to be able to do some things like Aaron is getting to do. That's
Pride, right?
yes, that's what they're after. So after the death of Korah, it's called Korah's rebellion in Numbers 16. After his death and the death of the people around him, then God wanted to prove to everyone once and for all, Aaron and his family, this is the family of the high priest. So he said, get a chief from all 12 tribes, a main leading male figure, tell them to bring their staff. We're going to all put them into the tabernacle, and tomorrow morning, we're going to check on them. Tomorrow morning, we're going to go in. Moses is going to go in. Moses is the one who does everything. Moses is going to go in, and he's going to look at those 12 rods or staffs that are in there. And when he went in and looked at them, and they had their names inscribed on them, so we know which one belonged to whom, when he looked at Aaron's rod, it had blossomed and bloomed, and full-grown fruit was already on it. An absolute miracle.
They turned back to the tree it once came.
Yeah.
Where the other rods,
they were just dead. The living tribe and the living person was Aaron in the tribe of Levi. And the other rods were just rods. They were just a piece of wood. And it was so important that then they took that rod and kept that in the tabernacle for a proof that this is the priestly family.
And the Lord, it wasn't just the people had to take Moses' word. In verse 10, it said, the Lord said unto Moses, bring Aaron's rod again before those people. Show them that it's the one that budded. You're not just making stuff up. And the other rods, they can clearly see did.
What an account in Numbers 17.
Well, that's what you just said, about taking them and keeping them as a token. Sorry.
Got any?
Because that is really. So these are the 5 reasons why Levi, good reasons why they were not given tribal boundaries, and the fact that they weren't given tribal boundaries, since a lot of these lists are about that, their name is left out.
Yeah. So, and what got us on that, we'll pick up with this next time, is why we've got 2 names missing, Levi and Joseph, and we got 2 names that have appeared, Ephraim and Manasseh. What's up? We're trying to answer that question.
Levi.
We've just answered Levi, and that's a fascinating, fascinating story. And I hope I was able to also just give you some more depth to the story. Everybody knows, well, they were the priestly tribe. You said that, you said it all. Oh, no, you haven't. There is so much there. There's so much there. And that is true. They're the priestly tribe, and that's why they were excluded. But why are they? And what are the makings of that? What are the movements of them being that? And that's what we're looking at tonight. And the story of Joseph will be equally fascinating. We'll look at that next time.